Good morning, Ben.
G'day, Sally. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Happy to be here. We're doing chapter 6 today, The Challenge.
Wow.
We are looking at the fourth industrial revolution, and where this chapter looks at the challenge being posed that we are experiencing globally and the urgent need for Australia to position itself to capitalise on it. It's also analysing how we're currently responding. So I think my opening question to you, Ben, is how do we create a society that's open and willing to learn and adapt in a world where accelerating changes are continuing and radical?
Well, and I suppose you want the answer in one sentence.
I do. That's a big question. Please advise.
Huge question, and it's one that the Australian society probably has been struggling with since it was founded. But certainly in the 90s, we had a conversation that was about the world is changing radically, and how are we going to build a clever country was the term we used then, and that was a really interesting time when a lot of really good things happened. Over the last 30 years, if you look back on it, we've had an interesting journey, and we've reached a point that Ross Garnaut suggests the last 10 years have been the dog days, where we kind of have stagnated at some level. And Paul Kelly in The Australian the other day said something the same. He said, our politicians have looked at the future and have resiled back to comfort and complacency and nostalgia. So, the challenge in this time, where we've got a whole range of things happening out there, irrespective of COVID, whether we'd had COVID or not. I wrote the book, Innovation in Australia, before COVID, and it was clear to me then that we were, if you like, stuck in a complacent and comfortable position. And we enjoyed that, and we had prime ministers telling us things like Australians are entitled to be relaxed and comfortable, and living in Australia is like winning the lottery. So there was that kind of reinforcing message was it's all okay here. 29 years of economic growth, look how clever we are. Now, as it happened, COVID came along and blew us out of the water. But in conjunction with COVID, what we've got is a range of technological shifts which are as profound as the technology shifts in the early 90s. So we thought the internet was pretty serious and disruptive. Well, things like blockchain are going to be even more serious and more disruptive. The whole issue in and around the human genome and genomics, that's going to be profoundly disruptive. Artificial intelligence and robotics are being now, as we speak, profoundly disruptive. So we have a whole range of technologies, and the question is, in an economy like in Australia's, where overall we are relatively wealthy compared to the rest of the world, can we change, and what is it we have to do to change? And that was the thesis I was arguing in the book. Without any sense of coherent vision, it's not going to happen, and we'll be stuck. And the bottom line is no human being wants to change. We're all pretty comfortable. We kind of like our lifestyles pretty much the way they are. And the notion of having to go out of our way to do anything special to change is, you've only got to look at the way we run our debates in Australia. It's up there with incremental nonsense, if you like.
And I think that with that, you're talking about a vision. That's part of our issue that we have spoken about before, which is, where are the thought leaders and who is creating the language system, the debates, and the sector visions. And a lot of this conversation is happening. There's plenty of fantastic reports, as you know, that have been produced. I think the being unified in a vision is part of the biggest problem at the moment.
I think there's absolutely no question about that, and that requires a level of engagement with the community that I'm not seeing anywhere. We have to change the way we operate. I mean, the way our media operates at the moment kind of sets up a short-term bipolar almost, certainly bipartisan, way of having the conversation. You're either for it or against it. It's not about, hey, we've all got a problem to solve and what are the options, It's a bit like, and I was trying to think of an interesting metaphor, for it. And it really is difficult because, the whole world is set up on polarities, if you like. You've got men and women, you've got black and white, you've got north and south, you've got east and west. So the whole world is set up on polarities. So it's not unusual that our system drops into those sorts of, if you like, bipartisan conversations. But somehow we have to break that cycle and say, hey, there has to be a change. And my thesis was that if we actually created a vision or a series of visions that allowed people to have a debate about the future, it's pretty hard to have a debate about the past because you can't change anything. Having a debate about the actual problem does set people up into well, I've got my idea and you've got yours and mine's right. Whereas if we have a debate about the future, there is no answer. So there is the possibility of, if you like, a form of compromise that allows people to move forward. And my hypothesis is that if we have a series of moonshots, that's one way of doing it. And interestingly enough, Mariana Mazzucato has more recently published a book on the mission-driven economy. She's an internationally renowned economist, and she's saying essentially the same thing. And she's using the Kennedy moonshot experience. We do these things not because they're easy, but because they're hard. And she's arguing for a much stronger role in government in these areas. So, how do we do it? I mean, we can't do it alone, and it has to be done in partnership with or in relationship to multiple groupings of people. Now, can we do that in this country? Well, we have the technology to do it now, and we did see a little bit of it happen during COVID. We had the National Cabinet, which was an unexpected positive out of the COVID. So it just may be that we're building some of the little blocks that we might need to put in place to build an overall learning system, although, it'll be a challenge.
Yes. I think with those vision sectors, Ben, that the trick is that we have a whole heap of industry silos at the moment, and there is a conversation around whether those silos need to be broken down or not, but maybe it's more to the point of bringing them together so that we still have that subject industry expertise, but we bring sectors together to collaborate and share learnings to enable them, a bit like the iPhone idea, where you get a whole heap of different technologies or innovations and you bring it together and create the moonshot, create something that's very special. Well, I think that's, and who's at the table there? I think that's what's really interesting too, rather than I don't know if this is a correct analogy, but, can you buy a seat at the table? Is that what's currently happening? Who's there compared to rather than by invitation, but by participation?
That's an interesting question. I mean, at some level, it's really obvious about who should be at the table, but you can't force people to do things, And I just think we need to explore different possibilities on how to do this. There certainly has to be a form of national leadership, and I think that means that it has to be government and business and probably the unions and probably even the leadership of the public sector, as distinct from just the politicians. We kind of and there's a couple of other sectors that don't get a big look in when you think about it. There's a whole, if you like, not-for-profit sector out there that's emerging that maybe ought to be at the table as well.
Yes.
They're kind of businesses that are designed around social contribution rather than money per se. And there are multiple sectors that we could engage with, and the answer is I'm not sure, but unless there is a beyond partisan position that actually is able to convene things and precipitate and provoke things, it's going to be very hard to do it in our current system. And I do think that, that's part of the reason I propose in the book a thing called the Prosperity Commission, something that's beyond parties and beyond sectors, and I haven't thought through the composition of it, but something that focuses on something beyond our existing problem.
Yeah. So, we were talking about different not-for-profits and bringing in different, I guess, diversity of thought there. And it's interesting to think about the service economy and STEM, and that is, you're posing a question in the book around, well, if we actually invest in STEM at the moment, where are people actually going to work? Because we have a service economy not so much set up for that. So
I think it's a huge question. Over 80% of our workforce currently works in the service economy. There's not a big market for STEM graduates in some of the service economy. Of course, there's the professional services. There's a whole range of areas. But, we've effectively, over time, emasculated our manufacturing industry. But, one of the things that doesn't get a lot of airtime in Australia at a direct level is the whole area of digitisation, or they talk about digital strategies. It strikes me that a country with the brain power that we have probably should be leading the world in some of these digital areas, and maybe we are, but it's not obvious to me. But, I was talking to someone yesterday about this, and all of our data centres and all of our data in the cloud, all of what we call the cloud, a majority of it is owned by and managed by Microsoft and Amazon, the big global players. We've kind of surrendered our capacity to manage ourselves in the same way we have with manufacturing. Yet I would have thought that they were areas where young people, if they're in STEM, should be working. But, we seem to have this infinite capacity to outsource much of our wealth creation capacity. So, STEM, only 30% of our scientists work in industry. It'd be interesting to know what people are saying when they want people to do more STEM education. Where are they going to work is the big question. It's not in industry because they're not there now unless we change our industry base.
Yes.
And that's pivotal. And I mean, having sector visions is one thing, but actually being able to monitor the progress of those sector visions and say, well, this is how we're going. And we have this limited view of how to measure things. It's all about the number of jobs. It really probably ought to be about the number of for-profit businesses. How many for-profit businesses are we creating, and where are people working in those businesses? And if we want people to work in STEM, then they have to be businesses that employ STEM graduates, which are science businesses, biotech businesses, engineering businesses. There's a whole industries out there that don't get sufficient prominence in our conversation.
Very, very much true. The Victorian government just this week actually launched Technology Adaptation and Innovation Program, a $5 million program post-COVID for small to medium enterprises, so up to 200 staff members employed, and you can get up to $50,000 grant for digital adaptation or innovation to grow your business. So it's a really interesting initiative. I'd like to know how they're going to track that over a period of time to see what prosperity results from it. That's I think the area that would be really interesting, and to also see a bit like the Victorian government doing the mentor program for small business, which has had a good take up, but isn't going to. I don't believe it's going to achieve its full budget spend with enough take up. And I'm going to be, again, having a look at this program, and I sent it out to about 5 or 6 clients yesterday that fit within that category to say, well, here's an opportunity to have a look at how you can continue to grow your business and do some of those innovative projects that maybe were too expensive. So it's a dollar for dollar thing. If you put in 50,000, you can get 50,000. So it's $100,000 investment. So there are lots of things like that. It'd be interesting to know. Is there anything like that in Queensland happening?
I'm sure there are. I'm not following it as closely as that. But think about it, though. They're all about inputs. The Victorian Victorian government hasn't come out and said, we want to create 5,000 for-profit businesses in the next 10 years, and we want to do it in these industries. Now, that may or may not be a good goal, but it's at least a tangible and at least it's measurable. And one of the things I read in a CSIRO document recently was something like that. They actually said in one of their documents, I'm just not sure if I can pick it up, but they actually quantified what they wanted to create in a certain industry that was measurable, and you could say, look, they wanted to increase the industry base by 50%.
Yeah.
And that starts to, we're better at managing inputs than we are at managing kind of the outputs and the outcomes of our investment. So, the government as part of COVID has announced $110 billion or $115 billion for manufacturing, modern manufacturing in Australia. And my question is, so what's the outcome they're looking for? And they'll say, more modern manufacturing. And I think if you're in a business and you said that to someone, they'd throw you out of the room. We need to be much clearer at a national level about what we're trying to do. If you look at our breakup of industries in Australia, and I think early in the book I outline our how we see our industry base, and it's really very interesting. Only 6% of our industry gross domestic product is in manufacturing. So why wouldn't we be saying over the next 20 years we want that 6% to be 15%, and we're going to rearrange our budget and our allocation of capital to do that. The next one we want to increase is maybe professional and technical services. That's currently 7.4%. We want to make that 15%. Really focus on agriculture, forestry and fishing. We want to make that 5%. Actually kind of have a picture in our head about what we want the economy to look like at an industry level.
Yeah. Has there been history there, Ben, as to why the government are avoidant of articulating a specific result? Because I'm sure in-house they would have one, but it's just not obviously going to be publicly committed to, a bit like, zero emissions for international policy. They're avoidant of wanting to commit to it until the last chance dance type thing.
I think the reason they won't do there's two things. One is it'll be very hard at a national level to get agreement on some of those things. So that'd be a tough ask to get a whole group of people around the table to say agree. The second thing is nobody wants to be held to account. Back in 1990, there was a whole range of documents published and objectives set, and we were going to be globally competitive, and we were going to benchmark against the best in the world. All that over a period of time evaporated, and I suspect there was two reasons for that. One is, data was harder to get, so it was really difficult to kind of compare ourselves with the rest of the world. And when we did get information, we didn't show up too well, so we didn't want to tell anybody. But, when you look at where we are in global competitiveness, doesn't matter which survey you look at, we're barely in the top 20. I think on the Switzerland IMD survey, we're 18 at the moment. And we've kind of vacillated in that, 15 to 20 bracket for the last 15 years. It hasn't changed. Now, if you look at our manufacturing performance, we've gone backwards at a rate of knots that's hard to believe. So, in a whole range of indices, we don't want to know comparatively how good we are. So if you start to set absolute measures, like, you get to be held to account. And who wants to be held to account, particularly if you're a politician? Even in business, it's hard. I think it's a real challenge, but if we don't do it, I think there will be consequences, because it's not as if the information is not available now. We live in a period of time where there's so much information, and artificial intelligence is going to make that easier to process and manage over time. So, excuse me, on a daily basis, we'll be able to tell how competitive we are. We can measure the dollar daily. Why wouldn't we be able to measure our competitiveness daily?
Yeah. How interesting.
The reason we don't want to have that information out there, I suspect, is because, the media wouldn't be able to manage it properly. They're so short-term and entertainment-driven. And even with the media, as I said, I've been thinking about this a lot. It's not that they're not smart, but they're disingenuous in their presentation of information and the facts. They present a version of the facts, or their version of the facts, or their interpretation of them. It's not as if, and both sides do it. It's just they're all looking for short-term leverage to make points. And I find that it just who wants to participate in a conversation about how clever you are? Excuse me.
Yeah. sort of goes back to communication as being, a big part of the communication flow of Australia. I mean, you're talking about media, but there's social media and free to air media as well. How that represents the culture of Australia as well. It's they have a huge role to play, don't they? And I mean, you only need to look to America to see what happened with Trump and the media.
I think that's true. There's a level of ignorance. There's a level of ignorance in Australia at every level about how important different sectors are and why business is an important part of society. I mean, people have this view about business as being, or government being moribund and business greedy. I mean, the reality is without both of those sectors, we don't have a country. Business is probably the only wealth creation unit we have. So if you want to be a wealthy society, you have to have a vibrant and thriving business community. If you want to have a well-ordered society, you have to have not only a government that manages the order, but it also has to have a government with a sense of purpose and vision, But people want to box the government up as, well, don't get in the road. But the reality is it's the only body that has the grunt to do certain things.
Yes. Yep.
And done well.
Which is like the church, Ben. Remember we were having that conversation a few weeks back about you were saying the Bible was so successful because at the time there were not as many people that could afford to buy books, and obviously all the clergymen were the ones writing books, and the clergymen were reading to people, and that's how that the narratives around the story of the Bible then sort of spread across the world. But the church is obviously one of the first largest businesses, a global organisation at the end of the day, and that is actually that institution isn't as well received as it used to be.
Well, none of the institutions are now. All of the institutions.
As they've broken down, people are going to look for business and to their workplaces and to politics for and governments, to bring about their sort of world order. So
I
to
certainly
speak.
think business has to play a new role going forward in conjunction with government. So two of them,
yes.
The two bodies, and if the unions want to get their act together, they could be part of it, but they need to redefine their roles as thought leaders for a nation, as distinct from just operational policy makers, And if they don't do it, I mean, it's not coming from the churches and it doesn't come from anywhere else.
Yeah.
We're really in a, if you like, an intellectual vacuum at some level. If you go through all of our major institutions in the last 10 years, they've all been found, if you like, wanting at a level in terms of leadership. You can start with the union movement. The Royal Commission didn't exactly give them a clean bill of health. The banks, they didn't get a clean bill of health. The churches certainly didn't get a clean bill of health. The army more recently, maybe looked a bit dodgy. Australian cricket looked a bit dodgy. And now the Australian parliamentary system, the work system in the Australian Parliament, looked dodgy at, if it wasn't just profoundly amoral or immoral. So they're all the leadership groups that people look to for a sign of hope, if you like. And they're all struggling.
Absolutely. They are. There's no stone left unturned there, and there's no shining light really.
So if we're going to have change, you've got to have places where there are signs of hope. And if it doesn't come from a redefined partnership between the key institutions in in society, then we're really going to be in trouble in terms of any of this work, innovation included, because innovation in a vacuum is at best irrelevant, and at worst, bloody just a waste of money. That
yeah. Do you think COVID, Ben? Do you think COVID has? I really like this quote from Young, which is, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." And I think some of these royal commissions and the disruption is actually bringing about conversation for people to realise things like all of what you were referring to with all our different leadership institutions, that there's opportunity there that really needs to change. Bringing it to people's consciousness, even though there was probably thousands of people that already knew all of this, but for the mass majority, bringing it to the media helps bring that to consciousness, and then therefore I guess consciousness is the first disruption of new beginnings.
Well, that's the start. I mean, we were talking before we came online about the chaos in a particular place you were working. It's out of chaos comes creativity. You can only have major changes, in a sense, if there has been chaos and disruption, And we are in a period in Australia where both of those words are appropriate, chaos and disruption. So we have choices to make. That's the really important thing. It's not as if all of these things are outside of our control at a level, We have choices we can make about how Australia needs to be in the future and how we'd like Australia to be in the future. We can't just say, it's a global phenomenon, or it's out of our control. I mean, some things are out of our control, but most of things we can make decisions about in terms of how we reshape the future of our economy and how we reshape the future of everything else. And until we do that, whether we have innovation or not it would be innovative if we did that.
That would be the start of the innovation, wouldn't it? I think I can't remember who said it, but I read it just the other day. Creativity is the thinking and innovation is the action. And people talk a lot about innovation, really when they're talking about creativity and they're talking about that chaos moment of where everything's happening at once and there's all different options and ideas going around. Well, that's creative thinking and problem solving. That's sort of siphoning your way through the chaos. And really the innovation is when the action starts.
Well, and that's right. And the really interesting thing is we know, just if you take our life experience, we know that, human beings are not necessarily open to change. We know that the greatest learning opportunities in our lives come from the greatest disruptions in our lives. Whether it's the death of a family member or a close friend, or whether it's a health incident, or whether it's a loss of a job or loss of something that's dear to you, that's when real human learning happens. So, as a nation right now, we're almost at a point where we're pretending COVID didn't happen. Oh, look, it's all back to the way it was. Look how clever we are. We're now going to have, and I think I read the other day, 4.5% growth next year. And you go, well, yeah, but so what's changed? And the narrative they're trying to create, or someone's trying to create, is, well, look, it's all back to the way it was. Now, I don't think that's an acceptable position. I think we have to say,
no, and it's actually inaccurate. Everyone, I think there's a lot of people talking about how is it we're getting such enormous growth. It just doesn't seem real because the rest of the world is still managing with the pandemic. We are as well. It's causing a lot of restriction with our supply chains. And yet here we are with 15% real estate growth and, under 2% interest rates.
Oh, look, I think
really something's gone wrong
there. We've seemed to have slipped back into the same narrative. Now it's the of economic growth. Oh, yeah, we had COVID, but we managed that and we've moved on. It's kind of like, well, we just haven't reflected on that enough to know that was a profound shift in our psyche. And, there's a whole host of things. In terms of a study of learning and how systems learn, COVID is that period of time was a most extraordinary time. So all of a sudden, Australians were prepared to give up all sorts of rights and all sorts of freedoms in the spirit of something bigger, which was community health. Now, what if we were able to give up something bigger in the pursuit of eliminating poverty or homelessness, or dare I say, landing a person on Mars or any other random moonshot, if we were all prepared to give up just a little bit to achieve something great. And that's the concept.
If we all could just eat less, we'd actually save a hell of a lot of water. And, water's in serious demand across Australia, and obesity is going up. So it's another contradiction, like I was talking about with the interest rates and the pandemic and the real estate going up. There's these strange contradictions that are sort of paradoxal. And that's the same one. If we've got obesity in our country, if everyone just ate less, we would have more water.
All of that. No.
It's a simple solution to a highly complex issue, obviously.
But if you look at it, I mean, if making change was easy at any level, you wouldn't have a health and fitness industry.
No, absolutely not.
Fat people like me wouldn't need to go to the gym because I willingly just kind of eat lettuce leaves and broccoli and all that stuff on a regular basis. We resist it, because we like the easy life, or we like we get sucked into the sugars and all of those things. So, but we have to come back to this, and I've been thinking a bit about this. I mean, the motivation to change, and that for Australia, where the average net wealth of Australians is probably up there with some of the best in the world, there's not a big incentive for us to change. Now, the big incentive during COVID was we feared for our lives. So fear is a great motivator, and greed is another great motivator, or the need to solve a problem is. So, I don't understand why, if I come back to those things, why we couldn't say, look, we're going to eliminate homelessness in Australia. In a country as wealthy as we are, it's not acceptable to have people on the street homeless. There has to be a way of fixing that. But on the other side, why couldn't we say Australia has the potential to be the greatest supplier of power to Asia? There's over 1 billion people in the world don't have enough power to actually lead a basically safe and sanitised life. So why couldn't we become the power hub for Southeast Asia? And we create all the power here. Now, people say, well, it can't be done. Well, why can't it be done? It's one of those tasks that we're doing it because it's hard.
Yeah. Well, that's sort of the uranium situation, isn't it? So being able to create the energy and the power
Absolutely.
is known, but what to do with the depleted uranium once there's no more energy in it? What do we do with that, as opposed to just putting it into the land, which is clearly not an option we want to go with. But that's sort of like an innovative idea where we could actually, it's a moonshot to actually come up with a solution.
It's a problem to be solved. And until we've got the will to solve it, we won't do it. Yeah, they're the issues, and that's where the creativity comes in. If you set seriously high stretch goals, then and they did. I mean, I think we've seen in during the COVID. I mean, globally, we've seen that the most amazing moonshot achieved in less than 12 months. So the world now has multiple vaccines, which up until now, the vaccine had taken anywhere between 5 and 15 years to get off the ground. And now multiple companies have done it in 5 to 10 months. Now that's a moonshot. Nobody talked about it as a moonshot. It was just an urgent thing that needed to be done to save lives. But it was a pretty amazing thing. Now government, we might say all the private government funded most of that.
Yep.
And nothing wrong with that, so they should. But why can't we have more of those? Make water in Australia. Water in Australia. It's not as if the problem has been there as long as we've been in Australia. Now, we've really done nothing to solve the problem, or even better than that, nothing to make Australia water resilient over the long term. We wait till there's a problem and we run around and we add a metre to the damn wall or something. It kind of. Yeah. So there's almost in Australia, in my view, a complete lack of foresight and no imagination.
Yeah. Well, it's a bit like why are we even producing rice at all? Because of the amount of water that it requires. There's just things that I don't. Smarter people than me may have the answers, but I don't understand why we're doing why we do certain things.
Growing almonds.
A conversation about all those things would be better.
Growing almonds in Australia. I mean, it costs an enormous amount of water to grow one almond tree.
I think it's 10 litres per almond.
Yeah, well, that's a lot of water.
10 litres of water per singular almond.
So that's a lot of water.
Insane.
And where's the but see, we don't have a good language. We don't have good tools to talk about it, and we don't have a good language system to describe it. And there are very few people out there trying to, and the economists, as a bit like the accountants, they have a very narrow mindset about what the language is, and that's all we talk about. So only recently, in the last 12 months, I mean, CSIRO produced a document on Australia, might have been called Australia 2030 or Australia in the Future or something like that. And it was kind of got a little bit of airplay in the paper, and a couple of well-known economists in Australia demolished it in an article. Waste of time. Why would CSIRO be doing this? They've got better things to do with their money. The whole thing was dismissed in a media cycle. And yet, there's a whole lot of smart people did a whole lot of smart work there, and it just disappeared. And it was the start of something good. So we kind of dismiss some of these things before they even get airtime. And I think that's a really, how would I say it? It's a really cynical view by groupings of people who aren't willing to have hard conversations. Can we stop there?
Absolutely. Thank you for your time, Ben.
Sorry.